My father was Fritz Lustig. He was born in Berlin in 1919. My dad was the youngest of 4 children who grew up in a very ordinary middle-class family of Jewish origin but not practicing Jews. In fact, all of his siblings and he were baptized into the Lutheran Church. So they didn't think of themselves as Jews. The Nazis thought differently. One of the extraordinary things is that although the Nazis came to power in 1933, huge numbers of German Jews believed that that was just a phase of history that would pass, and if they sat tight, they'd be fine. It wasn't until the pogrom of Kristallnacht in November 1938 that I think a lot of German Jews, including my father's family, realized that things were going from bad to worse. A large number of German Jews decided they had to get out. And of course it wasn't easy because there were very few countries prepared to take them. There were so-called quotas. A lot of them wanted to go to the United States. It was a long waiting list. Coming to the UK was really very difficult indeed. He got out in the spring of 1939, so only a matter of months before the outbreak of the Second World War. His older sister had left Germany in the early 30s. His older brother, who was very politically active on the left, anti-Nazi movement, also left earlier than my father. His parents, my grandparents, only left Germany in 1940, after the outbreak of war, and they spent the war years in Portugal, where one of their daughters was living. My father, as a teenager, had become a very keen and very talented musician. He played the cello. The condition of him coming to the UK was that he enrolled as a builder's apprentice, and his parents were extremely unhappy about that because they worried he might damage his hands. However, the relatives in the UK said, hang on a minute, what matters more to you, his career as a budding cellist or getting out of Nazi Germany? He came to the UK and started as a builder's apprentice. He actually quite liked it. In 1940, when the Nazis had overrun France and were massing on the northern French coast, Winston Churchill became obsessed with the possibility that they were going to try to invade the UK and that there would be some kind of fifth column of Nazi sympathizers already here who would help the Germans occupy Britain. He gave an order that all Germans and Austrians in the UK should be rounded up and interned. My father was caught up in that. So in July of 1940, he was arrested and shipped off to the Isle of Man, together with many thousands of others. He was extremely angry about that because he regarded himself, of course, as an enemy of the Nazis. He learnt that it was possible to enroll in the British Army directly from the internment camp. He enrolled in the Pioneer Corps, which was really the lowest of the low. It was the only bit of the army at that time that foreigners could enroll in. Something like 10,000 German refugees joined the British Army. And because of my father's talent as a musician, he was very soon enrolled in army orchestra to play concerts for other soldiers. He hated it. It wasn't what he regarded as the most effective way for him to fight Hitler, and B, the music that was played was not his taste in music. I've got quite a lot of documents dating from his time in the army, and this is actually from when he first joined up in 1941. I hereby certify that I understand the risks which have been fully explained to me, to which I and my relatives may be exposed by reason of my employment in the British Army outside the United Kingdom. Notwithstanding this, I certify that I am willing to be employed in any theatre of war. Signed, Private Fritz Lustig, on the 31st of July, 1941. My father spent 3 years in the Pioneer Corps, playing his cello, getting more and more frustrated, watching anxiously the progress of the war, obviously. And then through a series of coincidences, through a relative who had a friend who was in the British Army Intelligence Corps, he was asked if he would be interested in applying for a transfer out of the Pioneer Corps into the Intelligence Corps. Of course, he leapt at the chance. So in mid-1943, he was told to come to London to attend an interview in Northumberland Avenue, just down from Trafalgar Square, where he had an interview with a group of people. He used to describe it sitting around a horseshoe-shaped table, asking him all kinds of things. He was then asked to come back for a second interview in the afternoon. Wasn't given any indication as to whether he would be transferred or not, but then a short time later received a telegram, I think, just telling him to report to a particular station on the end of the London Tube line, Chalfont and Latimer, where he would be met for his next assignment in the Intelligence Corps. He did tell us that he was surprised and somewhat shocked at how much they knew about his family background. They knew that he'd been in touch with his parents, who by this time were living in Portugal. What they didn't know, he was relieved to discover, was that he had at that time been flirting with the British Communist Party. But either they didn't know that or they didn't care about it. I think they just wanted to kind of work out what kind of guy he was. He was met at the station when he got off the train, bundled into a jeep and driven off to a rather grand, stately home. He had no idea where he was. In the grounds of this stately home, there were barracks which had been built. And I think the same evening that he arrived, he was given 3 stripes to attach to the sleeve of his uniform, which meant that he'd been promoted from being a private, the lowest of the low, to being a sergeant, which was 3 ranks in one go. And he was absolutely thrilled with that. The following day, he met the commanding officer of the entire operation, a certain Colonel Kendrick, who told him what he was going to do. And what he was going to do was listen in to the bugged conversations of German POWs. He was going to sit in a room with headphones on, listen to their conversations, record them if they seemed to be saying anything which might conceivably be of interest to British military intelligence. And my dad always recalled the exact words that Colonel Kendrick used to him, which was something to the effect that what you do here now will be of more use than if you were on the front line holding a machine gun. And that gave my father a lot of satisfaction, I think, because for the first time he believed he was going to be doing something useful in the fight against the Nazis. Colonel Kendrick was a fascinating character. He had been in British intelligence since before the First World War. He was in MI5 from its very beginning. He was a leading spy master based in Vienna for many, many years. He had set up this operation at the request of Winston Churchill at the outbreak of the Second World War. And he oversaw the whole secret listening operation in 3 different sites. There was the site at Trent Park, which is where the most senior captured German personnel were held. There were then 2 other sites, Latimer House and Wilton Park in Buckinghamshire. They were never known by their actual names. Trent Park was known simply as Cockfosters. Latimer House was known as Number 1 Distribution Centre. Wilton Park was known as Number 2 Distribution Centre. They were never told where they actually were. Obviously, when they had a day off, my father used to describe he bought a bicycle, so he was able to cycle around the countryside, so he had some idea where he was. But never in conversations or in official communications were they referred to by their actual names. One of the things my dad did was to try and write his own life story. He wrote, "We operated in teams of 6 called squads, each in a separate room and with an officer in charge. We sat at tables fitted with record-cutting equipment. This was before magnetic recording tape was invented, and we had a kind of old-fashioned telephone switchboard in which we inserted plugs into numbered sockets in order to listen to the prisoners through our headphones. Each operator usually had to monitor 2 or 3 cells, and as soon as a conversation touched on a subject that we thought might be of interest, we flicked on a switch to start up a turntable and pulled a small lever to lower the recording head. We also had to keep a log noting what the prisoners were doing or talking about, and at what times and about what subjects we had recorded their conversations. And one of the things that he used to tell us, which I always thought was very interesting, was that the best information they got was when a prisoner came back from an interrogation session and would say to his cellmate, "Do you know what? I didn't tell them anything about X or Y. They wanted to know, but I didn't say a word. I never told them about this, never told them about that." And that, of course, was the information that they really did find useful. One of the first things that my father was told to do when he joined the Intelligence Corps was sign the Official Secrets Act. He was told he must never talk about the work that he was doing, not then and not afterwards. In the early period, from 1943 onwards, most of the POWs were either naval personnel who had been captured after their vessels had been sunk, or they were Air Force personnel who'd been shot down. There were relatively few German soldiers. However, after D-Day in 1944, there were increasing numbers of German soldiers who were captured, some of whom would be taken into a listening centre for processing and whose conversations could be of interest. My father was never very specific about what he learnt through all those hours of listening. He said, and I've got no reason to disbelieve him, that he actually didn't remember anything very much. The impression I always got was that what they picked up from this entire exercise were snippets which could be woven together by British military intelligence to produce a picture that was really useful. I do know that information about the development and manufacture of the Nazi V1 and V2 weapons were picked up very early through this operation and enabled the RAF then to go and bomb the site where these rockets were being built. The secret listeners were instructed, if they did overhear anything about what we now call war crimes, what they called atrocities, should be marked on the recording with a capital A for atrocity, because that would then highlight that there was something out of the ordinary on this particular recording. A few months after he started as a secret listener, the work between two of the sites, the Latimer House site and the Wilton Park site, put together a joint Christmas party. My father by then was what was called a mess sergeant, so he was pretty much in charge of all the arrangements. And one of the women who were also involved in the arrangements was somebody who he decided to get to know a little bit better, who ended up as his wife and my mum, who was also working in the same unit, although in a different capacity. My mum was also a refugee from Germany. She had grown up in a city that then was called Breslau in Silesia. It's now called Wrocław, and it's in Poland. My mum's name was Susan Cohn at that time. She was an only child. Her father had died of a heart attack in 1938, so it was just her and her mum. They originally wanted to leave for the US together, but the waiting list was so long that my mother also applied for a visa to come to Britain. She eventually got a visa to come here as a domestic servant, and that's what she did in the summer of 1939. She left her mother behind. Her mother couldn't get a visa because she was older, and alas, she was arrested and shot in 1941. She then also, through a family connection, friends of friends, was recruited into the Intelligence Corps, and she joined up and ended up in the same place as my dad, and the rest is history. The women who were involved in the secret listener operation weren't themselves listeners, for the rather bizarre reason that it was felt that some of what they would be overhearing was unsuitable for women's ears, because the POWs were all men, and what men spoke to each other about might not be appropriate. So the women were mainly in clerical and administrative positions. My mother was involved in filing transcripts, sending on transcripts deciding to whom they should be distributed depending on the material involved. My parents got married in June of 1945, just at the end of the war, and almost immediately after they got married, my father, who was still in the army, was sent off to Germany with the British occupation forces. So they had, I think, something like 5 weeks of married life together before he was shipped off again. He continued some of the secret listening work in Germany, where detained Nazis were similarly bugged in their cells to continue to produce what the British hoped would be useful intelligence. One of my father's frustrations always was that none of the material that he and his colleagues acquired were used in the Nuremberg war crimes trials. And the reason they were given was that the British didn't want to reveal that they had been doing this because they wanted to continue to be able to do it in secret. This is one of the documents that we have from his service record. This is actually when he left the army. It describes his military conduct as exemplary, and the testimonial reads, "A warrant officer with a long and creditable war record. He has done difficult work conscientiously and well. He is very willing, a good example, and earns respect." And 27th of June, 1946. When my brother and I were growing up, we didn't know what our dad had done during the war. He would simply say he was in the intelligence corps, and that was it. It was only when the existence of the Enigma machine, the code-breaking machine at Bletchley Park, was finally acknowledged in, I think, the 1970s. I remember him saying to us, well, if that can be talked about now, I think what I did can be talked about as well. I think I am now finally free of my obligations under the Official Secrets Act. But it did take, 30 years plus before he was prepared to talk about it. It wasn't until all the transcripts were declassified relatively recently that he learnt that the material that they'd acquired had been of genuine use. He'd always had a slight guilt complex that he'd had what he called an easy war. He hadn't been in the front line, he met his future wife. So when, late in life, he learnt that what he did had been useful, it made a big difference to him. It brings me great satisfaction that he lived long enough for that to be acknowledged, because many of the secret listeners, most of them in fact, went to their deaths not knowing whether what they had done had been of any use and never having been able to talk about it. He lived to be 98. He would, I think, have been thrilled to know the Army Intelligence Corps presented us, his descendants, with a little plaque which was the Intelligence Corps insignia and a little inscription which said, "In memory of Fritz Lustig, still listening."